They say Star Wars is a little bit like a buffet, a wide variety of offerings for people of many different tastes. But with so many different things on offer, it can be a little overwhelming to know where to start. But don't worry, I am here to help you. Grab your plate as I give you a guided tour through the buffet that is Star Wars television. Hello, my name is Naomi, and this is Loth-Cat Musings, where I share my musings about Star Wars and beyond. Okay, here we go. So, welcome to episode 2. Now, I know last week I said I was going to do a deep dive into the Bad Batch and my relationship with Star Wars animation. However, I spent a lot of time last week working out the logistics and the technology to get this podcast up and running. It was a bit of a learning curve, but we got there in the end. But because of that, I didn't have the time to plot out this episode as early as I had anticipated. But I think that is a good thing. Because as I was seeing who was engaging with the podcast in the run-up to the launch, I was realizing I haven't quite found that little niche group of deep dive Star Wars fans on the internet. And that's fine. It's going to take some time to get to them because there's a lot of Star Wars podcasts out there. But I realized the people who were engaging with the podcast were people who might not know what there is in the grand buffet that is Star Wars right now. There are so many different things on Disney Plus and the movies, etc., that it can be a bit overwhelming. So I will be talking about Star Wars animation today, but as a bit of a breakdown of all the different aspects of Star Wars television at the moment. Where do you need to watch other material before you can watch something? Where can you jump in blind? Do you need to watch all the movies before you can watch something? Who's Ahsoka and why does she have her own TV show? There are so many different things to cover, and so we're going to break this down into 2 separate episodes. This week, we're going to talk about Star Wars animation, and then next week, we'll look at the live action shows, especially in the run-up to the newest live action show starting on June the 4th in the States, June the 5th in Europe, The Acolyte. And so that podcast will be released directly before that show starts, so you know what to expect. So I'm really excited to help be your guide through this wild and ever-expanding, huge world of Star Wars television. And let's get into it because there's a lot to get through. Star Wars is a film franchise, but the style of storytelling really lends itself to television. In fact, George Lucas was inspired by the serials that would play before movies, things like Flash Gordon, etc., when he was creating Star Wars. So it's no surprise that as of this recording, there are 17 different television programs out there based on Star Wars. And out of those 17, 9 of them are animated. Star Wars got its start in television through animation. Not counting, of course, the infamous 1978 holiday special. But even that had an animated segment which introduced the character of Boba Fett. But that first animated series happened a lot earlier than you might have thought. 1985 saw the release of the Droids and the Ewoks cartoons. Droids ran for 1 series and followed the adventures of R2-D2 and C-3PO before the events of A New Hope. Ewoks ran for 2 seasons and followed Ewok Wicket and his friends from the Bright Tree Village on their adventures before the events of Return of the Jedi. My cat is named after Princess Nisa from this series. Now, I don't know if any of the material from Droids has made it into more recent media, but in 2018, there was a series of animated shorts on the Star Wars YouTube channel called Forces of Destiny, and some of the creatures and characters from the Ewok show made it into some of those shorts. They are so much fun. They have a major 1980s Saturday morning cartoon vibe, and all of the seasons are on Disney Plus if you'd like to check them out. In 2003, Cartoon Network launched Star Wars Clone Wars, not to be confused with Star Wars The Clone Wars, which started in 2008. This series ran between the release of the films Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith, and was 25 short episodes. It fleshed out the adventures of the Jedi during the Clone Wars, which was first mentioned by Obi-Wan in A New Hope in 1977. The film Attack of the Clones introduced the clones and the conflict, but in Revenge of the Sith, the next film, the war is coming to an end. The cartoon served as a bridge and an opportunity to sell more action figures, as Hasbro was the one to approach Lucasfilm about the idea in the first place. I have not personally seen all of these episodes, but they are available to watch on Disney Plus as Vintage Star Wars Clone Wars 2D micro series. Say that 10 times fast. Some of the characters and concepts from this version of Clone Wars did carry over into the Clone Wars, and it was a good testing ground to see if Star Wars animation could work on the early 2000s. George Lucas had a concept, and after he was done with Revenge of the Sith, he was able to shift his focus to this new animated series. In 2008, Star Wars The Clone Wars was released. This was a series that George envisioned, and he had a very large hand in the development and the direction of the show. He also brought on Dave Filoni, who had been working on Avatar: The Last Airbender for Nickelodeon as supervising director. Star Wars The Clone Wars is the longest running Star Wars TV series to date. And as a result, there is a lot of The Clone Wars, with 7 seasons and 133 episodes. It first ran for 5 seasons on the Cartoon Network before it was cancelled in 2013 after the Disney Lucasfilm deal. And then in 2014, Netflix released a shortened season 6, which consisted of 12 episodes that had been finished or mostly finished before the show was cancelled. And then, after years and years of the fans asking, 2020 saw the release of Season 7 of The Clone Wars and the final season of Clone Wars on Disney+. The show follows Anakin Skywalker, Obi-Wan Kenobi, and the Jedi as they participate in the war between the Republic, which was the main government in the galaxy before the rise of the Empire, and the Separatists, a group of planets that wanted to break away from the Republic. The Jedi and the Clone Army worked for the Republic, and on the Separatist side you had Count Dooku, General Grievous, and their army of battle droids. It also showed some of the political conflict within the Republic, with storylines following Padme and Bail Organa, as well as introducing new characters. The show spends a lot of time with the clones, giving them names and unique personalities, rather than just being nameless, faceless soldiers. It adds humanity and tragedy to their creation and their overall place in the Star Wars universe. In the films, I think the only clone called by name is Cody, who is the clone commander working with Obi-Wan Kenobi. But in the Clone Wars series, we get to know Rex, more about Cody, Fives, Tup, Echo, and many others. We learn that the clones have a strong bond of brotherhood, and how that bond gives them strength, and also experience the pain of loss when they lose members of their squad. We watch the relationships between the clones and various Jedi commanders grow, and in many cases deepen into real respect and friendship. Aside from helping to humanize the clones, the show also introduces or reintroduces several characters that have become fan favorites and further drive the overall narrative, including dark side user Asajj Ventress, and bringing back Darth Maul, who was presumed dead after episode 1. The show also gave some of the Jedi, who are mostly background characters in the films, their own storylines and unique personalities, such as Plo Koon and Kit Fisto, among others, as well as introducing new Jedi and expanding on Mace Windu and Yoda's storylines. This also was the show that really developed and introduced Mandalorian culture and characters to the fandom. However, the main characters of the show really are Anakin Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi. It does an outstanding job of really fleshing out Anakin in particular, showing who he was as a Jedi before his downfall, while also seeding in moments of foreshadowing. He's a much more well-rounded character in the series because they had the time to develop more nuance for him and his relationships. You also get to see a lot more of the relationship between Anakin and Padme, which again helps build up more foundations given to us in the prequel films. But probably the biggest impact the Clone Wars had on the Star Wars franchise was the introduction of Ahsoka Tano, who was Anakin's Padawan throughout the series. Initially not well received by fans, she has gone on to become one of the most beloved characters in Star Wars and is seen throughout the rest of the Star Wars TV canon. Part of her appeal, I think, is the fact that she was a really very well-written character and has a very strong character arc. You see her change, grow, and mature throughout the Clone Wars and beyond, in a way that many other characters just didn't have the opportunity to do because their stories were being told completely out of order. Outside of the films, Clone Wars has the biggest impact on the overall direction of the Star Wars franchise, and for many fans, it was the Star Wars they grew up with. Personally, I think Star Wars The Clone Wars is essential viewing if you are a Star Wars fan, because so many of the characters and storylines have long-reaching implications to the overall Star Wars narrative and the other shows that followed it. I would even say you could jump into the show without having seen any of the movies, since it was originally geared toward older children. The show does a good job picking up and explaining things along the way. But of course, having some knowledge of the prequel films does give you a bit of a leg up. With 133 episodes, it can be a bit overwhelming to know how to start and do I have to watch all of it, etc. And while there are some of the best moments in all of Star Wars in the Clone Wars, some of the episodes are not as great. Thankfully, the good people at Wikipedia have published a viewing guide for the Clone Wars. It tells you what order to watch them in, because the release order is not necessarily the chronological order, further complicating the issue, and which episodes are essential to watch and which ones are okay to skip if you want to. When I first watched the Clone Wars, I sort of cherry-picked episodes based on the storylines that I found interesting. I've now gone back and watched the whole series, but you don't have to. Star Wars The Clone Wars is a really, really special series. It has amazing characters, outstanding storylines, and it was some of the last Star Wars that George Lucas had a personal hand in, and it inspired everything that came after it. Don't be put off by the animation format or the fact that it was originally geared for children, because it is really, really good Star Wars. 2 months after Clone Wars was cancelled in 2013, it was announced that Dave Filoni and Lucasfilm Animation were working on a new series for Disney called Star Wars Rebels. Set 14 years after Revenge of the Sith and about 5 years before the events of A New Hope, it follows a group of original characters doing their best to fight against the Empire and, eventually, help create the rebellion as we know it from the original trilogy films. The first season in particular reminded me a lot of the TV show Firefly, if you're familiar at all with that. A mishmash of people living together on a ship, fighting against an evil superpower and for something bigger than themselves. We met Hera Syndulla, who is the pilot and owner of the Ghost, the ship that all of our heroes travel on, former Jedi Padawan Kanan Jarrus, a Mandalorian teenager named Sabine Wren, a gruff fighter named Zeb, and a grumpy, trigger-happy droid named Chopper. In the first episode, they cross paths with Ezra Bridger, a street rat teenaged orphan from the planet Lothal, and he joins their crew as well. While the series mainly focuses on these characters, there are appearances by legacy characters such as Lando Calrissian, a teenage Princess Leia, future Rebel pilot Wedge Antilles, and of course Darth Vader and the Emperor, among others. There are also a fair number of characters from the Clone Wars who have either large roles or small roles throughout the series. Also, Rebels introduced the Inquisitors, former Jedi who had been turned by Vader and the Emperor and are used to hunt down any surviving Jedi or Force users. You continue to see the Inquisitors throughout Star Wars media and video games. Star Wars Rebels helps create a very good picture of the state of the galaxy directly before the events of A New Hope, as seen from characters who start off as nobodies in the main narrative of the Star Wars saga. While downright silly at times, Rebels has a lot of heart and some of the most powerful and beautiful moments in any Star Wars media. The show, while not shying away from difficult themes, always leans into the ideas of found family, being stronger together, and most importantly, of hope. Dave Filoni, the producer and supervising writer, has said that one of the things George Lucas always reminds him of when they speak to each other is, remember to make these stories hopeful. Remember to give that to kids because they really need it. I feel that Dave Filoni really honored that ethos of George Lucas in this series. This is my personal favorite Star Wars TV series out of all of them. I have a really deep love for the characters and the storylines and the world that was created for Star Wars Rebels. Star Wars Rebels ran for 4 seasons between 2014 in 2018 and have 75 episodes. You can jump into this show without seeing anything else, but I personally think having seen some episodes of Clone Wars first makes it a much better viewing experience. I wasn't able to find a trustworthy list of which Clone Wars episodes to watch before you jump into Rebels online, so if you would like one, let me know, and I would be happy to create one for you. The characters from Rebels have recently started making their way into some of the live-action shows, making Rebels even more essential viewing than it was before. Personally, I think if you are a Star Wars fan, you should be watching Star Wars Rebels. It's all on Disney+, and I encourage you to go watch it. A month after the Rebels season finale, they announced that the next Lucasfilm animation project would be a series entitled Star Wars Resistance. Set just before and during the sequel trilogies, which is episodes 7, 8, and 9, it follows Kaz, a New Republic pilot who was recruited by the Resistance as a spy to help in the fight against the ever-growing threat of the First Order. Inspired by Dave Filoni's love of anime, the show has a very different and much more colorful animation style and a lighter feel overall. The majority of the show is set on Colossus, a large city-like aircraft refueling station on the ocean planet of Castellon. Along with Kaz, the show follows aspiring pilot and mechanic Tam, an accident-prone technician Nico, a group of racers called the Ace Squadron, including Tora Doza, who's the daughter of the captain of the Colossus. There are also appearances by characters from the sequel films, such as Poe Dameron, Captain Phasma, and Kylo Ren. You do not need to watch any Clone Wars or Rebels to jump into Resistance, and while seeing The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi are helpful, they are not needed to follow the story since the characters in the show learn about the events of those films during the progress of the story. I enjoyed Resistance, but I really didn't form any deep connections to any of the characters beyond a casual interest, and I felt that it lacked some of the heart and depth that made Clone Wars and Rebels so special. But it's a lot of fun, and it's really good additional material for the sequel trilogy, of which there's not too much of at this time. The series ran from October 2018 to January 2019 and had 2 seasons, with a total of 40 episodes, so it's not that hard to get through. It's all on Disney Plus if you want to give it a go. When the Clone Wars returned in 2020, that last season was broken up into 3 story arcs consisting of 4 episodes each. Each of those story arcs was based on concepts that had already been planned and sometimes even partially animated before the series was cancelled in 2013. The first of these arcs followed a group of clones called Clone Force 99, or the Bad Batch. They are a special group of enhanced clones. Hunter, who is the leader of the Bad Batch, has heightened senses that make him a great tracker. Tech has enhanced intelligence and can figure out any technology very quickly. Wrecker is large and has a reinforced skeleton that makes him super strong and really hard to take out. And Crosshair has exceptional eyesight that makes him an outstanding marksman. The idea for the Bad Batch came from George Lucas himself, and their 4 episodes in Season 7 of The Clone Wars were a lot of fun, and hardcore Clone Wars fans were excited to finally see the Bad Batch after having seen unfinished animation at Star Wars Celebration in 2015. But it was a bit of a surprise when they announced that the next Star Wars animation project was going to be about the Bad Batch. Many fans, myself included, why they were going in that direction. The episodes were fun, but did we really need another show about clones, especially one that just seemed to be about blowing things up and going on crazy adventures? I couldn't quite see where they were going and what they were hoping to achieve with this show. But when the first episode aired on May the 4th, 2021, we discovered that the Bad Batch was about much more than badass clones blowing things up. The first episode reintroduced the Bad Batch along with a 5th clone, Echo, who had joined the troop during the Clone Wars episodes. We also were introduced to a young girl clone named Omega, who, like Boba Fett, is an unenhanced clone of Jango Fett, meaning she doesn't age at the quicker rate the majority of the clones do. The series starts at the end of Revenge of the Sith, as the Clone Wars ends and the shift to the Empire takes place. Suddenly, the clones, who were made specifically to be soldiers in a war against battle droids, are no longer needed. What does the Empire do with them? How do these individuals who only had one purpose find a new one? And can they? Over the course of 3 seasons, we dive into these questions and adventure with the Bad Batch and Omega as they build a family, search for answers, and a new life in the expanding Empire, and learning to find who they are and a new purpose. The show acts as an amazing bridge between the prequel or Clone Wars era, moving into the aesthetics and the feel of the original trilogy. As it progresses over 3 seasons, we see the ship design, architecture, and even the color palette and sound effects shift from one era to another. While it does have a light comedic moment, the series as a whole, and in particular the last season, is much darker and heavier than any of the other animated series. There's a sophistication in not only the writing, but the animation and production as a whole that seems to be a culmination of the years of work and development from Lucasfilm animation team. What was initially marketed as sort of a A-team type series was developed into a deeply meaningful story with very significant impact on the entire Star Wars saga, while delving into themes of family, grief, trauma, purpose, parenting, value of life, and growing up in general. Even though this series is somewhat a direct sequel to the Clone Wars, you actually don't really need to watch too much of it to be able to jump in and enjoy this series. Of course, having some relationship with the clones does enhance the experience, but this is really a good jumping in point if you want one. There are 3 seasons of The Bad Batch with 47 episodes each, all on Disney Plus, and I highly, highly, highly recommend it. Next to Rebels, it is my favorite Star Wars animation and definitely in my top 5 of Star Wars TV series overall. The newest series from Lucasfilm Animation is Young Jedi Adventures. It is the first series geared specifically toward a much younger audience, so your 4 to 7 or 8-year-old, give or take. And it is set during the High Republic era of the Star Wars timeline. This is about 200 years before The Phantom Menace. And it's the time when the Jedi are at the height, not only of their influence, but what the Jedi are supposed to be. And it makes it a really ideal era for a kids show about Jedi, because you don't have to worry about the impending Order 66, all the Jedi dying thing that happens during the Skywalker saga era. The series follows 3 Jedi younglings training at a Jedi temple on the planet Tanu. Kai, who is kind of the leader of their little group and is very competitive, Liz, who loves animals and has a super kind heart, and Nubs, who knows a lot about plants and is the strongest of the 3, even though he is the smallest. The show follows typical kid cartoon formats, a loose story arc, with each adventure wrapping up with a nice moral lesson at the end of each episode. They travel to different planets throughout the series, including Batuu, which is the location of Star Wars Land in Disneyland and Walt Disney World, and they also go to Tatooine, among other places. The High Republic era was introduced to the Star Wars fandom in an amazing publishing initiative geared toward teens and adults that started in 2021 and has included dozens of books and comics. Throughout Young Jedi Adventures, there are characters and locations from the books that pop up here and there, making it a fun watch for fans of the publishing series too. Also, Yoda is a featured character who has shown up in several episodes. This show was my daughter's doorway into the Star Wars fandom. It's always been around her, but this was the first thing that really grabbed her. A show with ideas and concepts geared toward her age group that she could easily grasp onto and understand. She quickly became a huge fan of the show and fell in love with the Jedis, and now has found her way into the original trilogy because she recognized lightsabers and Yoda from Young Jedi Adventures. It's been really exciting seeing her have her own Star Wars adventure through this series. It's a really fun series, even if you don't have kids. It's light, uplifting, and a lot of fun. They've only had one series so far, with nothing else announced yet, but I'm hoping they'll do some more because I've been watching the same 25 episodes over and over again for the last several months. So some new content would be really good. But they're all on Disney Plus as well as on the Star Wars Kids YouTube channel. So that covers all of the animated series that Star Wars has released. However, there are a few shorter format anthologies that I thought would be good to highlight. The first of these is the Visions Projects. The first anthology was released in 2021 and was a collaboration between Lucasfilm and various Japanese animation studios. Basically, the studios were given free rein to create a short animated story set in the Star Wars universe and could be done and told however the studio wanted. And they didn't have to worry about canon or staying within the rules of the Star Wars storytelling. The result were 9 highly stylized and unique Star Wars stories. And then, in 2023, they released a second anthology, but this time with studios from all over the world, the UK, the States, Chile, India, etc. These 9 stories were even more varied in their animation style and story concepts. Visions 1 and 2 are on Disney Plus and are beautiful experiences in animation styles and techniques. I recommend them to anybody who enjoys animation as an art form and a form of storytelling, whether you're a Star Wars fan or not. While traveling one day, Dave Filoni started writing several short stories about some of the Jedi from the prequel era. He shared them casually with his friend Carrie Beck, who happened to be the senior vice president of production and development for Lucasfilm at the time. She asked if he wanted to develop it into a series, and they came up with Tales of the Jedi, an anthology of short stories that follow 2 different paths and 2 different choices. One path followed Ahsoka Tano and the other Count Dooku, each having 3 episodes that explored different eras in their lives and the different choices they made along the way. They are much more artistic than the Clone Wars in their storytelling, using a lot more visuals and less dialogues. Tales of the Jedi was released in October of 2022. Later, they announced they would do a second anthology that would be titled Tales of the Empire and would follow the paths of Barriss Offee, a former Padawan from the Clone Wars series, and Morgan Elsbeth, a character from the Mandalorian and Ahsoka live action shows. These were released on May the 4th, 2024. I personally really like these Tales of series. I think they're a really great medium for stories that are interesting and possibly even important to tell, but don't necessarily need an entire series to flesh those stories out. I will say, I think that these will all play better or make more sense if you have the corresponding material already, like Clone Wars for Dooku and Ahsoka and Barriss, and The Mandalorian for Morgan Elsbeth. However, they are crafted well enough and they are beautiful enough that I think they are intriguing and interesting storylines, even if you don't have all the background. My husband has not watched any of the Clone Wars and he has basic knowledge of the characters, but he still really enjoyed them. Both Tales of the Jedi and the Tales of the Empire are on Disney Plus, just like everything else. Whew, and there we have it. A somewhat brief overview of everything there is to offer with Star Wars animation at the moment. Bad Batch just wrapped up earlier this month and they have not yet announced what the next project is going to be. I'm hoping we'll find out really soon because I just really love Star Wars animation. The live action stuff is good, but there's something about the way you can tell a story with animation that's just different, and I find it speaks to the heart in a different way. So we'll have to see what's next. I have some ideas and some hopes about what it might be, but we'll have to see. They haven't said anything yet. I hope that this has been helpful for you and that I've inspired you to go watch something you haven't watched before, or maybe go revisit an old friend. Next week, we'll delve into the world of live action Star Wars television in preparation for the newest live action show, The Acolyte, which starts later that week. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you will be back to listen again. If you enjoyed this episode, please feel free to share it on your own social media, give it a like or subscribe wherever you're listening, and I look forward to sharing more of my musings again soon.